Welcome to Graphic Policy Radio. This is a comics podcast that's got a little thing for animation on the side. This is your host, Ilana Levin, aka Twitter's Ilana Brooklyn. And today we are journeying to a time where science was considered evil and people didn't believe it. And there were some really dire consequences when people treated women badly. And there was bats that came and began to eat people, and there was Draculas everywhere. And oh, hey, I've been bit by Castlevania. Castlevania is like taking over my mind. I didn't start watching this show until this year. I'm like the newest newcomer of the fandom. I've never played the video game. And
you got to watch it all at once. I'm really jealous.
I did pretty much. And I didn't begin watching it until just recently, and never played the video game in my life. And I have two guests who are here to talk about it with me. And I'm really excited to have them. And first we will help you determine if you should get into the show yourself, and then we'll get into the spoilery stuff. Joining me on the show is Kat Overland. Kat is a freelance culture critic and as the small press editor of Women Write About Comics, and is hoping to catch up on her pull list while social distancing this month. Welcome to the show again, Kat.
Hi, great to be here. Excited to talk
Leslie
about Castlevania.
Yes, Castlevania. Leslie Lee III is a writer and host of the Struggle Session. Welcome back to the show, Leslie.
Thank you so much for having me again.
Yeah, I was on Leslie's show to talk about The Dark Knight Returns not that long ago, and you've been on my show to talk about Deathstroke, and we're all uniting now to talk about a topic that's really pretty different from what we've covered so far. So, as I said, I was sort of a late adopter of the show. I feel like had somebody told me that Warren Ellis was showrunner of an English language anime, I might have paid attention sooner. It just seemed like such a crazy concept that this was a thing that could happen. So thank you, Alex DeCampi, for saying to me, yes, Ilana, Warren Ellison is showrunning an anime about Draculas. I was like, okay, thank you. I needed to know that. I needed that spelled out. I'm a huge fan of his comics writing, and I don't know that he's written for television at this sort of scale before. The show is extremely well produced and high quality. Like I said, I've never played the games, and it doesn't seem to matter, although I do find it fascinating to see the ways in which I can kind of vaguely sense out how a video game is kind of underlying it. But yeah, the show's quality and production is extremely high. There's so many pauses to look at beautiful scenery. They actually let you sit and look at this fantastical nature that they're painting on the screen. The voice actors are tremendous. Everybody's just knocking it out of the ballpark. And it's a horror story, but it's not upsetting that often. It's definitely, in this particular moment where the world is even more challenging than it was 2 weeks ago. And maybe it would be harder to watch, but I've found that it is not super upsetting, even though there are definitely some real political themes that we can point to. Because with horror, a lot of times there's a question of is this too scary for me? Yes or no? And there's gory stuff, but it's an adult anime. I don't know. I'd love to hear from you guys. Yeah, what do you think?
Oh, I was going to say, I think it definitely depends on your limit for graphic violence, because Warren Ellis could just... watching this, you can definitely tell he's having a lot of fun. And, he wants Dracula to be scary and powerful, so there's a lot of blood and gore. I think that's the biggest drawback.
I actually am a big fan of how bloody and gory and violent it is. This feels like a throwback to the yesteryear of anime and stuff like Ninja Scroll and Vampire Hunter D and all these other, bloody, gory, violent adult anime shows, which also have, great storylines and characters, and everybody has, proper arcs and motivations. Like the show it reminds me most of really isn't even an anime. It's kind of like a like a better Game of Thrones in a lot of ways, because it all is about like court politics and procedures and how is the war going and this, that, and the other. I think if you're a fan of that type of show, because all these streaming networks are trying to create their own Game of Thrones, including HBO, their own version of Game of Thrones. Netflix already did The Witcher. Amazon's doing Lord of the Rings. I think Castlevania is probably one of the better fake Game of Thrones so far to come out, because they let Warren Ellis handle it, who's I think is a really fantastic writer, and he wrote every episode of this. And I think it's, on the whole, very, very good.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it. And it's interesting you bring up The Witcher, because for me, when it comes to blood and violence, there's like this very narrow balance between me loving it and me not being able to take it. And sometimes it can be hard for me to categorize like what exactly makes something be in my okay space versus my like, run away. And I watched the first episode of The Witcher actually the other day because I was hungry for some post Castlevania content. And I didn't think it was very good. And it was also too upsetting. So I'm like, not only is this not very good, it's also upsetting. And yet I didn't feel like Castlevania was too much for me. And it's been incredibly gratifying. I just am so like revitalized wanting to talk about how good this show is. And definitely court intrigue is what's at hand in much of the story. So hopefully, if anybody else has anything else you want to chime in during the spoiler-free section of the show.
Is this like why you should watch Castlevania?
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned the voice acting, and the voice acting cast is stacked. So if you're a fan of Richard Armitage, he's the lead, and he's also who is Thorin Oakenshield from The Hobbit, but and a lot of other stuff. But he is also having a lot of fun, and his line reads are just freaking incredible. But season 3 was exciting because Bill Nighy shows up, and Jason Isaacs is there to say some incredible lines.
Can we say about Bill Nighy as Saint-Germain, this is non-spoilery, his storyline has some like real connections to Michael Moorcock's science fiction work, and he sounds like Michael Moorcock in it, and I don't know if that's deliberate. I will go into more about what I mean about that in the spoiler section, but like, shout out to him.
I'm really
such
curious.
Good performances. Such good performances.
And Bill Nighy doing more vampire stuff if you miss the Underworld series, since he's one of the elder vampires in that, and he plays like almost like a mayor but more powerful. In this one, there's a really great cast. James Callis from Battlestar Galactica, Dr. Gaius Baltar, he plays Alucard, and Rila Fukushima, she comes in the third season playing Sumi, who is a vampire, like a Ronin, looking to hunt vampires, and Peter Stormare. He plays like a Viking vampire. So it's a really, really good cast. And I really enjoyed their performances.
And like his character, when it first comes in, Peter Stormare, like I had this feeling it was going to be this really one note, like barbarian character, but he actually is way more interesting than that. I didn't feel like any of the characters ended up being one note, even though, like, seriously, like I felt like when he came on, when his
Godbrand,
like Viking, when Godbrand the Viking vampire came on the screen, I was like, oh god, this is going to be unbearable. But then by the second appearance, I was like, no, this is a great character, bring it on. So it is that kind of show. Like even when you think somebody's going to be just a one note and irritating stereotype, they're actually great. So
yeah, I thought this was really interesting season because it had a couple like Avatar-ish notes, Avatar: The Last Airbender, Legend of Korra notes to me, especially with the Rila Fukushima character, because she shows up with another vampire hunter from Japan, as who's voiced by Toru Uchikado, and I felt like he was kind of like a Sokka character. Like,
oh wow,
he gave me like a lot of Sokka vibes. So it was kind of interesting to see it start playing with like these animation archetypes that I know.
Right.
Because I know some of these characters have storylines in the game, but I don't know which ones are which. So it's all
Right.
a fun mystery to me.
Well,
So Leslie is here from like actual video game playing land, and Kat and I are from like, I don't know. So
Yeah, like I think Saint Germain is from the game, right? But
basically all the characters, except for most of the named vampires, they're not from the game. But basically all the human magicians and whatnot are from the game. But as far as the Castlevania storyline goes, the vast majority of the games don't really have a very complicated storyline. The storyline is basically Dracula has returned from the dead after a dark ritual. His castle is back, and whoever is the Belmont of the time has to go and kill Dracula again to stop the darkness from taking over the world. That's the story of like about 90% of the Castlevania games, and the only thing that really changes is the time period and the Belmont that's a part of the story. They did try to do something a little bit deeper with the some of the PS3 era Castlevania games, where the storyline actually turned into Dracula is a Belmont who was a vampire hunter but was betrayed and also tricked by Satan, and it's this whole big cosmic scale storyline going on, more with a more fleshed out story. Has no connection whatsoever to the TV show though. This is all completely original stuff, other than the Belmonts being vampire hunters and Dracula being the king of the vampires.
Oh, wow. It's interesting. One of the things for me, like we immediately got really geeky about all the locations and the specificity of them. And like how rooted it is in like, this is in Wallachia. And then when they're like, oh, now they're in Styria, like my husband was like, I think that's in Austria. Go Google it. Yes, it's Austria. We're correct. Like there's a lot of geography that gets played out all around Central Europe. And then in North Africa later on. And the setting the setting is an interesting component of it. Like it's not super in depth. There could definitely be more in that space. But if that's the kind of thing that appeals to you in a story, this does have that going for it.
another thing is that everyone is very pretty.
That is
There are
true.
a lot of sad, beautiful men.
And everybody is really tired. Like everybody sounds so exhausted.
It's very relatable.
Actually, I want to get into that in the spoiler section, so hold on to them.
Okay.
But yeah, no, the people are beautiful. The animation's beautiful. And the people are like not generic looking. It's so nice to not have any kind of same face issues. All the character designs are really unique. They have like women who don't all look like each other, but color shifted.
Oh, there were so many
nice.
good vampire wives in season 3.
Oh my God, it's true. We now have 4 different possible vampire wives for us in season 3. It's like, whoa. And there's lesbians. Like this, so like this is great. Like in case the question for you of do I watch this is, are there lesbians? Yes, there are lesbians. You should watch this. I forgot that's a key factor. And are there characters who are people of color with really good story arcs? Yes. Like I think Isaac is the best character. Period.
Oh, Isaac is definitely the best character. Absolutely. And his voice actor is incredible.
Yeah, he's so good. So do we have anything else we want to say before we go into full-on spoiler land?
No, just if you have been fiending for that good old school anime, like this is really good and the animation looks good, and like say the modern Berserk anime, it's for the most part like very, very well done. I think maybe there's a bit more of 2 people talking in rooms than there were in the old school anime days. But once you get past that, the action scenes are really actually quite phenomenal when they do them.
I was
They
impressed
really
'cause
are.
It felt like I don't know, Castlevania kind of feels like an old school anime, as that you can definitely see that the animation is a little like where they're putting the animation money into. But I even felt like some of the episodes that didn't have quite the full range of motion for some of the fight scenes, like it was very economical how they did the fight scenes that made them really fun and interesting.
And we do know because of Twitter that they did put in extra time to make sure that the first fight between Alucard and Simon Belmont had like extra drapey hair. So they have some priorities.
I mean, that's what I want. I want there to be some crackling sexual tension between 2 beautiful, sad rivals. That's what I want from my anime, and Warren Ellis is delivering it.
And with that, we enter the spoilered land. I, for one, will be the first to admit that I didn't realize that Alucard was Dracula backwards. Like, yeah, I don't really know how to spell, so. But anyhow, which actually brings me to, I'm one of the things that I find most interesting about the show is I feel like the whole theme of it is people who are exhausted by the world. And the question is, do you want to just take the world down with you? Or are you going to do something about that problem?
And the answer is almost always take the world down with you for most of these characters.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's the show is really nihilistic most of the time.
Well, it's very Warren Ellis. Like, do you think Warren Ellis dislikes the Catholic Church?
Yes, that's true. That's something else that I was going for it. Well, it's interesting because on the one hand, it acts like there's some validity in the theology, right?
Right.
It's like
true. There is the fact
that Lisa would be in hell. I was like, that's ridiculous. She's a good person. And then it was my husband who was raised Catholic was like, that might be purgatory. Actually, I was like, you know what? Actually, you might be right, but still, like, that's giving credit to like the church's notion of like heaven and hell and sin is somehow like accurate and real in that way. And I don't mean like the good stuff where they're like, hey, stop robbing poor people. I mean the like weird stuff that is not particularly right.
But I mean,
socially minded.
Yeah, the thing I picked up on is that, like another dimension, and also God is bad too. God's an asshole.
Yes,
So even if it's all true, I mean, if you're looking at it from an objective perspective, Lisa, who seemed like a person who did pure good, and she still ended up in hell somehow. It's because she didn't worship this particular, God, deity, and he is like an insane person, and so he has created hell for all the people who don't worship him, and even if you spend your life healing and helping people using science and advancing human knowledge, you still end up in hell because God is a mad God.
I guess that's the difference between me watching this as somebody who's not an atheist was being like, see, it's so unfair. They have bad theology where these things are all wrong. And like hardcore atheists, you'd be like, see, fuck God, which actually is interesting because, I mean, truly, the moment where it took me a little bit of time to get into Sypha.
Sypha, yeah.
Sypha as a character. I didn't really love her until she said, God is my enemy. See, look, he's scared of me. Like, that's when I said, you know what? You're okay. I like you.
I think most of the character took a little bit of time to grow on me. Like, I hated Trevor in like the first couple episodes. I was like, I have seen the drunken, bored guy who's still a perfect fighter like before. That's just it was really, really boring to me. I also didn't help that Warren Ellis's version of humor in this show is to have the characters just randomly start talking like people in 2020 doing improv. Like that's the number one form of humor. But eventually I think, all the characters get better the more we learn about them. I still wish Trevor had like a little bit more substance. Like, I don't know, maybe like he should hate vampires, maybe he should be really mad at monsters, but he doesn't seem to have, he just seems to be like a too easygoing guy to supposedly have all the troubles that he has, and too, dispassionate, but maybe that we'll see more of that later on.
Oh, I feel like
go ahead.
I was going to say, like, how you mentioned how everybody seems so fucking exhausted. I mean, to me, Trevor is just burnt out. Like, he had to deal with all this shit. He's the last Belmont, and it's like, who gives a shit? Now Dracula's going to kill the whole world? Like, I guess. So to me, I don't know. That's an archetype I really like. Sad sack, competent adventurer. I could deal with, like, less getting punched in the balls, maybe. Warren Ellis could scale back that a little for me, but...
It's interesting, because for me, I was, like, watching the show, and I said, if you describe Trevor Belmont's character to me, I would be telling you, fuck that guy. I do not need to see that guy. That is so boring. And I'm tired of his fuckboy bullshit. But then actually watching the show, I was like, no, you actually can do a Byronic anti-hero and have me not hate him if you do it well enough. Like, and I really think that the voice acting was part of me actually liking it, because I just if you described him to me, that is not a character I'd be happy to spend a lot of time with. I'm sorry?
His delivery is just, like, he makes me laugh so hard. Richard Armitage's delivery.
If I burst into flames when I enter this church, that's on you. Like, amazing.
Right. And I really like him and Sifa. I love their dynamic, and I'm glad that, like, the third season is all about, like, hoping your OT3 gets back together, and your OT3 pining for their like missing pieces, and you're like, get it together, guys. The reason you're so dissatisfied is because Alucard's in his castle.
I literally have written in my notes the following words. Sorry, one sec. Alucard finally gets a threesome, but it's a creepy one.
Yeah.
That was so disappointing. I was like, oh God, this is going to be terrible. And actually that shows you again, the penultimate episode of season 3, you're intercutting between these really intense scenes that are all happening on completely different levels. And the same level of like fear and foreboding is manifest in all of them. And I thought it was so interesting that the show's like, yeah, we're going to give you this thing you wanted to have happen, but it's not going to happen the way you like at all. And it sort of is like how in the, in the death scene for Dracula dying, like it's still incredibly emotionally painful, and you want him to get killed, but you do still feel the pain of having to kill your own father. And it wants to give you enough of what you want, but then show you the ways in which it's actually fucked up.
To me, also, like, it's the threesome, so like Japanese vampire hunters arrive in his idyllic lonely castle, and he takes them under his wing. And you get the threesome, but it sort of felt like how fanfic tropes play out. So, like, you have the bad boyfriend first, and then, like, the good boyfriend can come in. And sort of felt like Warren Ellis is like, okay, he is a sad bisexual Dracula. And our other two people have also been sort of dissatisfied with their great adventure life. You know, like, please rate and review and see what happens next chapter. So it sort of felt like reading a sort of formulaic fanfic in that sense, even though that scene was very different. I don't know. I've read a lot of fanfics, so that's how I can relate to an OT3 on a show like this.
Thank you. No, this is it's a very important perspective to bring to bear to this conversation, because all of that is hanging around the show in a really clear way that the creators are interacting with, even in their own commentary.
Oh yeah, Warren Ellis is definitely like creating all of that tension and OT3-ness intentionally. It's not like some shows where you're like, oh, did you guys not notice this kind of queer like chemistry happening? He knows.
Yeah, he's there for that. I mean, I think one of the other big things that it's just like, this is so Warren Ellis, is like he's all about stories where there's this hidden wisdom that is out there that's really powerful, and like who deserves to access that hidden knowledge? How is that hidden knowledge used? And, you know, in this story that's all based around Dracula, and it's sort of, I was rewatching the beginning of the show before we started because I wanted to sort of have a refresher of it. And it is sort of fascinating, like, Dracula is not interested in humans, and yet he spent all this time perfecting human science and medicine. Like, what happened that made that change for him? I mean, after Lisa dies, we know why he goes and decides to kill the world. But, like, before that, like, what is the story arc of Dracula becoming this repository of all of this knowledge? And I had never really thought about Dracula as a character for that before. And then from then on, the whole series, like the two Japanese vampire hunters, they're going to Alucard because they want to get the forbidden knowledge. And he's like is he withholding it from us or not?
And then the 5 women, the 4 women vampires talk about that with Hector too. The sort of like technology that they have and have been able to maintain because of their longevity.
Yeah, and I think, well, at one point they say that the reason why Dracula, you know, travels around and learns stuff is because he was inspired by Lisa. He already had, you know, a ton of knowledge, and she came to him to get some of that, and then that drove his passion even more. I think the most we get, Alucard talks about how, you know, his father is actually not a monster. He's a man of science and philosophy. He wants to understand the world he lives in more than anybody, being, you know, one of the most powerful beings in it. So they really did make Dracula a very, very intriguing character. And I kind of missed him in season 3 since he's not in it at all. But he makes, a really good, believable villain. And another thing that they did to kind of explain the conflict, they actually talked about how his, plans and his rage don't actually make sense. And all the other vampires are like, what the fuck? Why does he want us to do this?
I love that.
I think
all of them
that's
show
so
up
great.
And they're like, what the hell is this?
Well, because he basically is one of these. He's this, and I see this very much through a political lens. Like, he is this powerful man who's decided that he's going to just take the world down with him, and he's not even transparent in that with most of the people. He's transparent in that with Isaac, and then Isaac is on his own, basically identical quest to that afterwards. But he's committing suicide by using the whole world to do so. And one of the reasons that I really appreciated Carmila showing up in season 2, one of those reasons is because, oh my God, have you seen her? But the other reason is I wanted someone to point out, hey, aren't you basically committing slow suicide right now?
Aren't you killing all of us?
Yeah, like the way that she would put, and Godbrand as well points at that in his own way too. Like the way that they're there to debate with him and to have scenes, really intense conversation scenes with him was really great. I enjoyed Carmilla so much in season 2. And then in season 3, she's just abusing people. And I'm really glad that she's got her wives around to make me happy. Cause I'm no longer a Carmilla stan. Now that in a world without Dracula, I am no longer a Carmilla stan.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And Warren Ellis is like, here's this hot, sexy lady vampire who's got a better head for strategy than Dracula does at this point, and you root for her. And then at the end, they're like, oh, I think it's really interesting how Warren Ellis does sort of the psychosexual horror in interesting ways. And with sort of starting with Carmela, because you're like, oh, this is kind of a sexy dynamic, powerful lady vampire, sort of like more naive forge master with Hector, right? And it's sort of playing kind of tropey. And so I think he plays a lot with these ideas of things that we find sexy, but that are not good in real life, but because you're watching a vampire anime. So it's cool. All right. She's a sexy vampire. And then at the end, you're like, oh shit, this is actually horrible. There's nothing sexy about it by the end.
He's all about giving you what you think you want. Yeah.
Yeah. My favorite scene with her is when she just beats Isaac nearly to death just because she can. That's reminding
Hector,
us Hector. Yeah. And that's reminding us what a vampire is. It's a monster. You don't fall in love with them. Don't trust them. They're all, evil people who view humans as food. So I really enjoyed that they made that scene where, the cool, vampire that we're kind of rooting for because she is more sensible and rational than Dracula. We think she's better than him. It's no, she beats the shit out of Hector just because she could and starts talking to him like he's an animal.
Right. Because then it's he is to her.
Yeah. I was just God damn, season 3 making me feel bad for Hector. I resent that. And yet here I am feeling that. Right.
Right.
I do want to talk about eyes. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I was going to say, it makes you you're for a second, and I'm I know that the vampire that's courting him is going to turn on him. How it's going to end up, but you're still oh, I want this.
Yeah, Lenore is amazing. And she's also spelled it out to him. He knows what this is. Yeah. And he has no choices,
Right.
So I want to talk about Isaac again because he's my favorite.
He's great.
Isaac is such an interesting character. He's coming into wanting to learn as a boy. He's being beaten and brutalized, I think, by Crusaders. I don't know. I couldn't place the exact situation. Mm-hmm. And he's I want to learn magic so I can help you, literal person who is oppressing me now. Which is kind of the dynamic that he maintains with Dracula in the sense that Dracula is also someone who's going to destroy the world and he's going to keep serving him. But he's he's just so compelling all the damn time. And I also don't feel like we've seen someone quite like him before in this sort of story.
I find him fascinating because he's so powerful. And so restless.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
this season,
I was always super confident in his abilities and everything until that episode where he's going against the wizard who's mind controlling all those people. That was like the first time I was like, oh shit, Isaac is in trouble. Like when you have that moment where there's literally a hive of human bodies being controlled, and you have this is also the first time I felt bad for one of the night creatures, really. You have one of his night creatures is like holding up this globe of these swarms of human, and it's like Atlas holding the world. And then the swarm of human bodies descends and consumes him. I was like, this is amazing, like cinema, right? This is amazing art. And like, wow, I really feel for you, giant hell monster. And also Isaac.
I thought that was cool. Them diving into more the hell creatures. 'Cause it's sort of, it's sort of this interesting contrast to the vampires that have Hector captivated, right? They're keeping him for his power, and he's like rising these demons from the dead, but they all seem like really fucking amped about it. Like, hell yeah, like I'm here to destroy whoever you point me at. Like, thank you so much for the second life to kill. You know?
Yeah.
That was very interesting to me.
Yeah, I really like Isaac's arc. I like seeing him, like you said, he's shown as really, really powerful throughout season 3, but then he's presented with a challenge that seems like insurmountable for almost anyone as it escalates and escalates. They did a really good job of editing that scene with 3 other scenes that were taking place. There were 2 sex scenes and 2 massive action scenes taking place all at the same time in the show. And they did a really good job of constantly, ramping up the tension to at the point at the end where we think, Isaac might actually lose because he loses all his demons and his soldiers, which we thought he had an almost infinite supply of, and he just has to fight basically barehanded in order to survive and win.
Yeah, it was quite the climax. Hey, the other thing that came from the Isaac storyline that I really loved was we get what I believe to be the only like baseline normal human character who has any agency and is compelling in any way in the entire show. And that's the captain, the ship captain. Like, the ship captain is great. And I think he's the only person who has the only human who has no special powers, who shows any self-determination or brains or gum or anything in the whole show.
You don't think, as like a positive character, I felt like the judge was doing a lot.
No, the judge was killing the judge gives you this thing, right? Like he's killing all these, he's like a child rapist, murderer, like whatever. Like he does have agency.
Right.
But
I guess that's what I mean. Like he's definitely steering his own ship.
That's true.
A horrible, child murderer.
Oh wait,
but
Saint Germain is the other one. I'll talk about him in a minute. But
yeah.
Anybody have any other captain thoughts?
Yeah,
I loved him.
Yeah, he's played by Lance Reddick, who is mostly known from The Wire, but he's has a wonderful voice. I'm kind of sad we didn't get to see more of him, but I couldn't really see anything happening to him except the thing that happens to all the captains that say pilot Conan the Barbarian ship. In all those stories, they always end up, dying because they take him off. And this was his, Isaac's journey. That was just a Conan story. He comes to this town that's run by this evil wizard, and he takes them all out in order to, complete his quest for vengeance or whatever. That's a very, Conan the Barbarian like story. So if the captain had stuck around, he definitely would have gotten killed.
I was really expecting him to die. So I feel like Warren Ellis must have him up his sleeve to pop out. Because you don't create like such a dynamic character like that, to me, anyway. Maybe.
That's a good point. But you're right. It is totally a Conan story. That is a good observation. So let's talk about, so while that is a Conan story, I want to talk about the Michael Moorcock story hidden over in a corner of the Castlevania story. Have either of you guys read any of his work at all?
No.
Or like Elric of Melbourne?
No,
I haven't heard nothing but good things though.
Yeah. I basically got into him because I listened to Hawkwind a lot. And
okay,
so
I was going to say I've listened to Blue Oyster Cult, so.
Well, there's the connection too. So yeah, prog rock artists do love Michael Moorcock. But one of his big things of his particular brand of psychedelic cosmic sword and sorcery is he has the concept of the the infinite corridor. And Saint Germain is out there trying to find the black corridor. And I'm immediately like, oh, it's a Hawkwind. And it felt like all of the imagery that we see through that corridor, it all felt like it was coming from a separate Michael Moorcock section of the universe in a way that I really liked, because it's a multiverse. Why not have part of this be like leaking in from the Michael Moorcock land? And then when you have that, the big reveal of the crucified monster in the basement, I started referring to that whole sequence as being like, oh, that's from the Hawkwind in the church basement. And now I'm just really obsessed with the notion.
Because to me, that's Evangelion right there.
Ah,
that's like a huge, right? Yeah,
points of reference, very different.
The only reference that I had, like when I saw that, I was like, I see.
Yeah.
So tell me about the Evangelion thing.
Well, so it's interesting because Evangelion is one of those animes that plays a lot with Christian imagery, but is not really trying to interrogate Christianity. Really,
it just looks cool.
Like, yeah, it just looks fucking cool. So they're all the kids and the robots are fighting these aliens called angels. And it turns out, I guess, spoilers for Evangelion. Is that okay?
It's okay.
Yeah. So
everyone's seen it but me.
So when it turns out that Nerve, the organization that they're all that runs all the robots and stuff, actually has a captive angel crucified, like an enormous one, in the like core of their base.
Oh wow!
So and like that's funding their science or whatever, and it's like a horrifying reveal. So it's sort of interesting seeing that anime image recontextualized in a story that is pretty, like, not subtly or metaphorically critical of the Catholic Church.
Yeah, several of the monsters, a couple of specifically of the monster designs do look like the angels from Evangelion, like the seraphim demons that there are like 3 or 4 of in the last.
Those were so cool.
Yeah, they look.
They're very biblical with the multiple eyes and the wings.
Yeah, and another thing that the corridor remind me of, but this is another work that borrows from Michael Moorcock, is The Witcher. A central, like the main storyline of The Witcher 3 is about this character's ability to travel between different worlds and realities, and it has kind of the same effect because The Witcher basically takes place at the same time as Castlevania does, but we usually think of dimensional hopping as something that happens in the far future in science fiction. And so when we see, these characters in this medieval storyline, like hopping to another dimension that's like, and they're on like another planet with alien moons or machines roaming around, I think that's a very like interesting thing to see, it was very interesting in The Witcher, and the sequence in Castlevania is almost exactly like the sequence that happens in The Witcher.
That's really interesting.
Well, the idea of the corridor itself, like of the Black Corridor, like having the access to all the different points of Earth and all the different multiverses, is it like I think like one of the first people to really coin something as a multiverse in that same way was Michael Moorcock with his own multiversal work with the Eternal Warrior. And like, I think that this is definitely like all kind of coming through there as well. This is such cool layers of things. I want to read one line from the poem by Michael Moorcock, aforementioned The Black Corridor, as a song by Hawkwind, ends with the words, "Space is a remorseless, senseless, impersonal fact. Space is the absence of time and of matter." And like his voice when he's reading this aloud on the live album of In Search of Space Ritual is like, this is Bill Nighy playing Saint Germain, who, by the way, great character. I think there's going to be a lot of Saint Germain cosplay going on in the future.
I could see that. I liked it as I like the idea of hell as a parallel or like a separate dimension. Yeah. As opposed to like literally like the more biblical interpretation of it. Yeah. I guess so I was raised Buddhist, so Catholic imagery is like I understand all of that stuff on a more intellectual than spiritual level, I guess. So there's like in one iteration there's like the 10 worlds, and those are from like when you reach enlightenment, when you have like all the knowledge, you're at the top, and then heaven is lower than that, and then, you know, you have your multiple hell levels and stuff. So to me, it sort of seems sort of felt thematically tied, as you talked about the who is the arbiter of knowledge and who is preventing knowledge, and do you deserve this knowledge, depending on what you're going to do with it. That I felt like was really tying together in season 3. Especially with Isaac, because it is like a Conan adventure where he has to fight this evil sorcerer king, but he doesn't free the town. He like murders the rest of the survivors, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So,
but he says he wants the city to stand though, in case somebody else moves in.
Exactly. Crazy. So I think it's really interesting that he gets this like hero's arc, even though it's pretty grim.
Yeah, even though he's a supervillain. This is his supervillain origin story.
I mean, I guess like my question is like, is Isaac impartially sympathetic because we see him grapple with racism in the story, or is that part of the reason why we feel that way?
Well, I think part of it is his human relationship with Dracula, right? So for him, it's like a lot of beyond his ideological desire to destroy humanity. There's that personal revenge factor.
He shows loyalty. Unlike Hector. I actually thought, Hector, he kind of got what he deserved for the most part, because, he betrayed, this person who, really believed in him, and he didn't have to. In fact, it was really interesting because Isaac and Hector are basically used by Carmila to convince Dracula to do the same thing. The only difference is Isaac doesn't betray Dracula in the process, and Hector does betray Dracula in the process.
Well, I think Hector thinks he's manipulating Dracula to do the right thing.
Right.
Like he's not coming from a place of ill will. You can still say that that's wrong, but it's not like malicious.
No, it's not malicious.
Carmila. Yeah. But I love when Dracula says to Isaac, "You may even have a soul." And then he sends him into the desert. And I wanted to be like, dude, don't send him into the desert. Send him somewhere he wants to be. Like, that was a very noble, like when Dracula goes and rescues Isaac, I'm like, yay. But I wanted him to maybe not send him into the middle of the desert on balance.
They gave me very exes who respectfully left and consider each other like very good friends vibes. Like they have this
vibes.
Real romantic intellectual vibes going on. So I think in that sense, and then you understand that he has been wronged. So I think that's sympathetic. I don't know. I found myself, it's sort of like, damn you, Warren Ellis. I know what you're doing, but it's still happening. Like, why am I rooting for this ghoul? But he's very beautiful and like, they were fucking rude. He could have just gone through that little town and nobody would have died.
Yeah. But speaking of, sorry, go ahead.
No, but I was saying you can't really blame any of the townspeople, considering for all they know, like the apocalypse is happening. There's constant monster attacks. Like, why would they let a bunch of monsters roll through the city just because the guy in charge of them says, "Oh, no, this is fine, actually. Yeah, don't worry about it."
I guess I would do that because I would immediately be killed by one of those monsters. Like, it seems like it's worth a shot, right?
Oh my God. I know. You'd be like, well, this one is kind of cute. Can I pet it? Like, I don't know.
It's like, well, I don't think we're going to win this altercation. So
that's an interesting question. I want to talk about the townspeople in general. Like, I just, in the beginning of the show, we see all the townspeople going along with the church and having a grand old time as they burn a woman who's trying to save their lives alive. And basically just all the townspeople, like then the next time we see townspeople, we see those two guys in the bar talking about goat fucking. And for like 2 seconds, they're like, fuck the upper class. And I'm like, yeah, you tell them, peasants. And then they're like, and fuck the Belmonts. And I was like, oh, this isn't going to be good after all. And it's like
everybody in Wallachia who won't fucking leave, even though it's a literal hellmouth.
Yeah. It's
I see what you're saying here, Warren Ellis.
All the peasants suck. I just want there to be some peasants that don't suck. It kind of makes me mad. The speakers, however, are interesting. Were the speakers in the game? Leslie?
No, so not that I'm aware of. She's in the game, obviously. She's in a couple of games, Tifa, but I mean, like the game.
She's like a priestess, right?
Yeah, she's just, I mean, and we're talking about like a NES game. Like, I didn't even know that she was supposed to be a woman when I played that game. You know, it's just like a blob. It's just like a blue blob on the screen. There, you don't really learn too much. She's supposed to be she's a witch of the church, I think is her description originally in the game. But I really have to emphasize that the early games just don't really have too much of a story. The second one kind of did because it's a sequel, and the storyline is that Simon Belmont, who killed Dracula in the first game, has been cursed by Dracula, and now he has to gather up all of Dracula's body parts that's been spread across the land and kill him again. And it's one of the earliest mainstream role-playing games with actual text-based storyline that you can follow along. Still very rudimentary, I have to say, because the Castlevania games are really just kind of action games, and some of the monsters you see, and so every game starts with you just entering Dracula's castle, and you move from room to room, fighting these waves of monsters that mostly keep respawning. Sometimes you have fishmen, sometimes you have bats, you have flying Medusa heads, and then you move from room to room, and then eventually you fight a big boss character, and then you move to the next stage. It's a video game as video game, the early ones that didn't really have storyline or much of a narrative other than kill the monsters.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess I kind of thought there was more to it because it felt like
speakers feel like they have a lot of lore.
Like, yeah, exactly. And the concept of the speakers felt a little bit half-baked in a way that made me assume that, well, people who've played the games must know more about them. This must be just something I don't know.
No, it was something...
and, they didn't explain Forge Masters either, really.
Yeah, it's because in the game, I think Isaac and Hector they're just other villains in some of the games, but they're not necessarily connected in it, or like in this court with Dracula or anything. Like all of the real big backstory is all from Warren Ellis, pretty much. The only character that kind of had a similar story in the games as he does in this is Alucard, because he's Dracula's son, who is half human, half vampire. His mother has died. His father is trying to take over the world, and he rises from a slumber in order to go and lend his hand to help humanity and fight Dracula.
Wow.
What do you think? So what's your political analysis of Castlevania? Because I feel like there's a lot going on that I love, and it's really fun and tropey, and like everybody's having a blast. But I feel like I don't know if there's like, what is the coalescing theme?
I mean, yeah, that's sort of the thing I was warning about, is I think it's super nihilist, and there's kind of no space for the 99%, so to speak. They're all kind of terrible.
Right, it's sort of like the hoi polloi are very complicit in their own subjugation.
Well, they're like hardly people. Like they don't have any agency. They don't do anything about it. They let terrible things happen and they don't get involved, except for the captain who's cool.
Right, you'd think more people would be like, seems like a lot of kids die immediately after speaking to the judge.
I think,
like,
yeah, because I really do think the show is doing a lot. It's doing, court intrigue. It's doing, swashbuckling Conan the Barbarian adventure. It's doing, these kind of almost like ghost stories or haunting stories, or at least like a monster in the forest stories. It's trying to do all these tropes where regular people are just mostly there to be slaughtered and for the hero to come in to prove that the villains are dangerous, right? It's doing like all these, is combining these 5 different genres that actually have nothing, not that much to say about common people other than like, we shouldn't trust the powerful. Like that's kind of the main thing. This series will remind me a lot of Vampire Hunter D, but Vampire Hunter D is a little bit more like it's very different because the vampire lords do rule over humanity in that, but Vampire Hunter D makes it very clear that all the quote unquote peasants hate it and are fucking pissed off, but they just aren't strong enough to do anything. They can only fight off these creatures of the night, and night by night they have to fight them. And when Alucard, who is actually also a character in the main character in Vampire and the D, comes along, they're just happy to have some more powerful help to fight off Dracula, because they want to defeat all these vampire lords who have taken over their world and are 100% representative of like monarchy and the ruling class, and everybody knows that they're bad. But Castlevania starts off from the premise like Dracula is not actually doing anything until the humans fuck up, and then he gets his revenge. Whereas,
like the real oppressors were the church.
Yeah,
definitely.
And then I guess that continues in some of the towns, but there's never. Like the townspeople are never helping them out. Like you'd think more people would be pissed off about all these weirdos showing up to their church, right?
Yeah, you're like,
oh yeah, Sala.
Yeah, I was sort of hoping that Taka and Sumi would take on that sort of I guess more proletariat role, because they are like directly like these subjugated humans who are trying to save their country from the power vacuum that has occurred since their vampire subjugator has died. And I guess there's that nihilism there, right? There's no, this might be a reach, but I don't know. It made me think of sort of how Parasite, the like political conversations around Parasite, because of the lack of class solidarity, And it's sort of like the inability for them to work with Alucard and accept that.
Yeah, it really is just that, because what they say to Alucard is we don't trust anyone. We're always betrayed. That's just that nihilistic perspective that a lot of the characters have, and it ends up leading mostly to their own destruction when they try to turn it on others.
Right.
Well, I suppose this is a good time to remind people that nihilism is bad for you. So take that for real. Right.
So it's really interesting seeing some, like a lot of fanfic tropes being put into this show that is actually really bleak at its core to me. Like Hector's story is very nihilistic, but he's also like the wooby. Like the character that everything bad happens to, but he's so pretty, and like you feel bad for him.
Right.
But he, it's like, you don't need to write Wumpfic about him because Warren Ellis is just doing it.
He reminded me, both because of his look and his torture sequence, of Griffith from Berserk, who has like a similar arc, but he's much more willful. Griffith is much more willful than Hector, so actually his downfall ends up being a lot more painful for the viewer and for all his friends once he gets his revenge. And I would not be surprised if Hector gets his heat back, gets a comeback in the next season, where he is able to take out all the vampire queens who are torturing him.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think it's interesting because the voice actor for Hector is Theo James, who is the like the stoic YA love interest for the Divergent series.
Oh.
So I think that kind of adds like that, because he's like that tormented, handsome hero, but also like, necromancer and stuff. So who's working for Dracula. So like he fulfills all these different like wooby purposes, right?
Yeah. And I mean, it's like, or like with Carmila, like she acts like she's going to bring down the mail order, and like she announces herself in this way that's like, I'm going to bring down the mail order, but then it's like, no, she just wants more power for herself.
Yeah, she was very I'm with her during some of the speeches.
Totally.
Like, and they're like sisterhood, right? But it's like we're all working together like ladies to use these people as cattle.
Yeah, exactly. And yet we're also like, oh my God, they're our wife. Like,
right, sure. So
it's like, because they're amazing. I was like, when there was like Westigia and she's like 8 feet tall, I was like, thank you, Warren. We never get this. Like,
it's really interesting. Yeah. And I mean, I guess I'm just curious to see sort of like the end like what he is doing with all this kind of sort of trope subversion, or sort of like making you root for the characters, like using this cool character design and that kind of stuff. All these anime signatures, and like, ooh, hot lady, big shoulder blade, like big shoulder pads, kind of thing with Carmila. And then that switch around, that sort of like reveal for those characters. So what the reveal ultimately will be, or if he's just going to write this for as long as Netflix is going to, like, is there an ultimate end to these storylines, or are you just totally flabbergasted every time Netflix hands you a stack of money?
I actually have a genre tropes question for you guys. So in season 3, it's clear that that Trevor and Sypha have been traveling together as lovers. And, you see them in bed together, but you never see them kiss. And I was looking, I think the first actual kiss on the show that's like a romantic kiss is between Lenore and Hector. And that's like 3 seasons in, and in a like fucked up situation, right? Yeah. Is that normal for shows of the genre, that there's no kissing, but like there's obviously people having sex, including nudity?
Yes.
Like it's very tell me more. This is fascinating.
Yeah, so like in Berserk, like there's a big long arc, will they won't they arc between the main character Guts and Casca, who is this female general in this mercenary band that Guts is in. She's in love with Griffith, but Griffith is in love with Guts, and Guts is in love with Casca. So it's this kind of weird, triangle going on, and not just romantic love, but adoration too. They all appreciate each other, but eventually Guts and Casca do fall in love and have sex one time before Casca loses her mind. Griffith murders all their comrades, etc., etc.
Of course, it has to be like the saddest scenario possible.
Yeah,
right?
It just does. Yeah, this sort of action anime. There's no room for romance. Vampire Hunter D too. Like if you fall in love, you die. D can never know the warmth of another person because he's a vampire, and if he gets close to somebody, he's going to want to bite them and drain their blood. There's really I think this sort of storytelling, this sort of action anime very much frowns on just normal, happy relationships. Even when people are in relationships, they're not outward about it because half the time they're like in a war meeting, gathering their war parties together. They're not going to be holding hands and sitting on each other's lap during that.
Well,
It's all about the battle.
So we see Trevor and Sypha hold hands all through season 3. They're cuddling all through season 3. They're in bed together in season 3, but they don't kiss.
Yeah.
So I thought that was actually wild, because I feel like in a lot of adventure anime, some of the fun for the writers and the audience is sort of picking up on more subtext, and for them to be so like, oh, your feet are cold, like it's a lot more explicit.
Yeah.
Than a lot of the older animes too that it's pulling from. It's sort of like you could interpret it that way. They're probably be boning, but like the show's never going to tell you. Versus this, where it's like, yeah, we're boning. It's happening. We're fucking in this cart.
But like, it's interesting to me that you can say like we're fucking in this cart, but you can't show kissing. Like that's what's getting to me. As being
kissing's too soft.
So it sort of felt like more explicit than the trope than for the genre to me. So like kissing would be like, whoa. Also, like, do they have toothbrushes back then? They're probably like Trevor's probably disgusting.
Everybody's
Let's be real.
They do mention a lot that Trevor smells really bad.
Yeah, so
he needs to stop drinking so much. But yeah, no, that was what I was trying to understand. As I was like, it's interesting to me. There's nudity, like there's nudity, but like kissing, that's a bridge too far.
Well, that made Alucard's sex scene so sad, right? It seemed like it was like the most tender and emotional one.
Well, right? Except it's creepy. It's like, I don't think it's just the intercutting that's creepy. I think like.
Oh no, because like there's like that edge of suspicion with these two characters that show up. Yeah. Otherwise, because Warren Ellis starts with this beautiful, idyllic scene of Alucard spending his solitude in the beautiful woods and stuff. It's sort of like, oh, now something has disturbed him. I want them to be good, but.
Well, he's like a Bambi, right? He's like in the forest gathering his like fish and like. and his garlic that he likes to roast and eat whole, which now I really want.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, it's like, well, that's one of the things I really appreciate the show with also is it takes a moment to breathe and let you look at nature. Like I remember in one of the earlier episodes, you just get this red moon and the camera just spends time looking at this red moon. And when they're in the countryside outside of where, you know, in season 3, like it lets you actually look at the beauty of nature.
Yeah, and this does kind of get to like what you just mentioned gets to a political angle that the show I feel like could have went in but really didn't. Like Dracula maybe wanted to eradicate humanity because of the environmental damage they done throughout the show.
Yeah, I kind of was wondering if it was going to pick up with that with all the nature scenes.
Yeah, but it really didn't. Like when we see like the pile of shit in the church or something like that, or like, you know, all these, you know, decaying buildings that we see, all these big projects. Like Dracula's never looks out and says, you know what, I liked it better when there were trees here or something like that. That could have been like an ongoing theme throughout it, but it's not really picked up on.
Yeah, like with the sort of industrialization, quote unquote, of the wizard town.
Yes, yeah.
You know, as people are being used to build this beautiful city.
Yeah.
But yeah, I felt like it could have definitely dug deeper into that.
Oh, I've got a question for you guys. Was Sulla aware of what he was doing at all? Like, was he being completely mind controlled? What do you think? The leader of the monks.
I think we're supposed to think that he had some idea of what he was doing, because they make a point, because he actually says to the guy that don't treat me like I'm crazy, and the guy and Saint Germain, he tries to reason with him several times throughout it, like, you need to be careful and stop what you're doing. You have a fucking giant eldritch demon in the basement. You more or less, he suggests this, that, you know, this is bad for him. So I think, and when he looks at what he's done and that he's actually opened up a portal to hell, he says, you know, what the fuck? Yeah, he did.
That's what I mean. Like, was that the spell breaking? Like, or was he just not realize what he was doing this whole time?
I think he was supposed to be. So the judge is like hardcore authoritarian fascism, right? And then Sulla is supposed to be like the dangers of complete zealotry. So I think it's not that he didn't really know what he was doing, it's that he just totally redirected whatever intense zealotry he had before for the church. Was like immediately redirected. Exactly. He knew what he was doing, but he was always going to be that way regardless of what he was doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I do want to say what a cool concept that is, of like an anti-church, like a demon falls into your church and everybody is, you know, mind melds with it, and, you know, starts doing its work, and you turn your massive crucifix upside down, and then you put the demon up beneath it. I thought that is just like a really, really, really cool, creepy thing that I hadn't quite seen before.
So totally, it's interesting to me because that night creature is created by Isaac. And that was the reason that he was it was so focused on Dracula, right? And,
yeah, I think so.
Because of his will controls that night creature. But it's interesting that it would go for the church because of Isaac's faith being like this whole other plot thread.
Yeah, and
so to like use the church and faith in that way was interesting to me.
Yeah,
right, because Isaac does say that he's Muslim.
Yeah, and like they talk about that, and like he's like the self-flagellating dude. That was part of his faith in the previous season, and he talks about how he lost his faith and wasn't praying and wasn't connecting to that side of it. And then you find out this whole time, this night creature created by him, in some way moved by him, subconsciously or not, is like chilling under the church.
Well, thank you guys for joining me. That was like exactly the conversation that I wanted to have. Is there anything that you haven't had a chance to say that you wanted to?
I do want to say that for the demons and where they come from, he got this from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, because what these people are doing is bringing souls from hell and having them inhabit the body of dead people, which is how vampires work in the Buffy verse. And Buffyverse also suggests that hell is just another dimension. In fact, there are several hell dimensions. So if you also are a fan of Buffy and its lore, you might get something out of this too.
That's true. And Marvel also has multiple hells as well. You got to contain all those stories and make one big multiverse of it all. I didn't know that about Buffy, though. That's fabulous.
I guess this is the other thing. It's interesting how Warren Ellis uses, in fan fiction, there's the concept of dubious consent, which is not a real thing in the real world because you can't, that's not how consent works. But the sexual violence on the show is not the same sexual violence that you expect from a show like this. If you're comparing it to Game of Thrones, that's kind of how sexual violence is presented. The way Warren Ellis uses sexual violence in a way that is very different than the genres he's playing with do.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Because it's still sort of like a power examination, but it's not... a woman hasn't been the victim yet. And I think that's something that could, that's also a warning if you're wondering whether or not to watch it, right? There is still sexual violence in it, but I think it sort of has been out of the, I haven't seen it discussed as much. And I think part of that is because it's being perpetrated against men, and in a way that is sort of like the situation becomes a different situation versus an outright assault at the beginning. So it's sort of the same thing that he keeps doing, handing you one thing and then showing you another. And so to tie that in with all these other things, I don't know. It's hard to talk about, I guess.
I think
anyway,
it is hard
that's
to talk
kind
about,
of
I'm really glad you brought that up because that's very true. That is probably one of the reasons why it's not oh my God, another. Well, one, it's spare. It's not right. It's not constant. It's done sparingly, and two, it's not just women, and it's not being done in as much of a salacious way or graphic way in some ways. But there's definitely complicated,
There's but I do think in some ways it is meant to be eroticized, but in a way that is it is erotic and it is disgusting at the same time.
Yes, that's a better way to explain it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that's sort of what I mean. So it's just, and I don't know how I feel about it, because I don't know that necessarily bringing the sexualized violence aspect of it to that level really brought a lot to the narrative to me. That betrayal, I felt didn't need to occur at the same time. The juxtaposition is strong and emotional, but I can't tell if it's too much quote unquote fan service in a show that is nothing but really fan service. So
these are the questions.
I enjoyed the Lenore and Hector storyline because, anybody watching this show with their brain on obviously knows from the beginning that Lenore is just views Hector as a means to an end and less
right.
than.
And even Hector knows this, right? The show at no point is this is expected behavior or normalized behavior.
Yeah, but he forgets, I think, because he's so lonely, has been treated so poorly. We see him forget in real time and then fuck himself over even more.
Well, to me, it's sort of it felt like he didn't have really a choice. Does he buy into this softer fantasy he's being given, or does he continue to get the shit beat out of him? Right. But it's so watching. I think for Game of Thrones, you see a lot of that sexualized violence as sort of this is an expected part of our gritty world versus this is a real betrayal and something that is very traumatic for these characters, this is a weapon that they are using, but at no point are you well, I guess that's just what happens.
Right. It isn't normalized as like, well, this is how things were. Were, what do you mean were?
Right, exactly. Yeah, like this is just a historical rape. Like, you know. So it's not like that kind of like adding, it's not set dressing for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you guys again. This is totally the conversation that I wanted to have. Hooray.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so tell my listeners where they can find you on the internet. Leslie, where can folks find more of your awesome critical work?
Yeah, just check out Struggle Session, patreon.com/struggle session. We do not 1 but 2 bonus episodes every week. Working out there hard for your $5. I know it's hard out there for a lot of people, but we appreciate all the support. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And where can we listen to read more of your work, Kat?
You can find my writing on awomanwriteaboutcomics.com, where I write about comics and TV and film. And you can find me on Twitter at Dog Underwater.
And of course, this is your host, Ilana Levin, aka Elana_Brooklyn. That's Ilana Brooklyn. I am on Twitter a little bit too much. You can definitely find me there. And I'm also going to be a guest on an NPR podcast live show this upcoming week. I guess I'll share that information around soon.
Right.
And as we like to say, keep it geeky.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.